If you watched any of his legendary career with the New York Jets, you know who this guy is. The great Marty Lyons joins us now. Marty, great to have you back on the show, and I hope all is well as you get set to be the big presenter for Joe Klecko coming up next month.
Yeah, all is well, Jake. I'm excited about going to Canton. It's about time that Joe got inducted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but he's been very understanding, more so than I would have been in the last 30 years. And it's a great opportunity for all of us to be in Canton and share that moment with Joe.
I want to let everyone know who's tuned in right now that all super chats that we get today for Marty, your questions at the end, we're going to donate any money earned to the Marty Lyons Foundation. So if you're watching this and you have a question for Marty, make sure you write it in, and we'll make sure that we get a donation to Marty's foundation at the end. But Marty, let's start more with Joe Klecko, right? I mean, what was going through your mind? Take us through the emotions on finally seeing one of your great friends get honored and be inducted into the Hall.
Well, Jake, every year I would call Joe after, the selection committee made their choices, and I would say, Joe, I don't know when they're going to wake up. And I would go on and on and on about why he needed to be there. And Joe was very, patient. He'd just look at me and say, are you done? He goes, if it happens, when it happens, I'll be grateful. But the more I looked at it, 30 years, nothing changed. His statistics didn't change. He was still all pro in 3 position. If they had moved him to an offensive guard position, he probably would have been all pro in 4 positions. Led the team in sacks, led the team NFL in sacks, part of that New York sack exchange. And I think only 2 things happened in the last 30 years that he could put on his resume from the football side of it. Number 1, he got inducted to the Jets Ring of Honor. And number 2, the Jets retired his number, saying that there would never be a guy that would be good enough to wear number 73 again. And I think the third thing that happened is he became a man of faith. And I remember in 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. once said, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. Or whatever you have to do, you have to keep moving forward. And that's what Joe did for 30 years. But it's a proud moment now where I can say, Joe, you don't have to run. You don't have to walk. You don't have to crawl. You're right where you deserve to be. So everything happens, Jake, in life for a reason. And there was a reason why he waited 30 years. But it's a proud moment now, not just for his family, but for all of his teammates and anybody that ever had an opportunity to meet him.
Marty, when you look back at Joe's career, right, and you would know it better than anyone, do you think a big reason why maybe it took so long was just because of the fact he didn't play in a Super Bowl, or, a lot of those Jets teams weren't always getting, national spotlight? Do you think that had a big reason as to why it's taken this long for him to finally get his due?
Well, I think those are the 2 main reasons why he didn't go in right away. And then the further you got away, then more players came behind you. And if we all played as hard as Joe Klecko did every single game, then we would have won a Super Bowl. But unfortunately, there's more players that leave the league without a Super Bowl than they leave with that ring. Joe was just a tremendous teammate. He made us all play better. He held himself accountable, but he also held his teammates accountable. And I tell the story that, constantly before every game, he would come up to me and say, are you ready? Are you ready? And then I'd walk away. Are you ready? Are you ready? And I go, Joe, how many times I have to tell you I'm ready? I said, why are you asking me so many times? And he goes, because if you're not ready, you're going to get hurt. And even worse, I could get hurt. So it was a privilege to play with Joe. I was fortunate enough I had him on the outside of me when I was playing defensive tackle, and on the inside when I was defensive end.
The sack exchange, Marty. I mean, your career synonymous being on those great Jet defenses, those great Jet defensive lines. All these years later, what does being part of the New York sack exchange mean to you?
Well, I think, remembering the group that we had and how hard we played, I don't think you'll ever see 2 edge rushers like we had. You had Joe Klecko, you had Mark Gastineau. You couldn't double team both of them. And Abdul and I in the middle, we knew that we had to tie up the two guards and the center. But more importantly, the back seven, they were solid. They gave us an opportunity to get to the quarterback. And every single week we'd go into the game with the mentality it's not if we were going to get a sack, if we were going to hit the quarterback, it was how many and how many times we were going to get back there to hit the quarterback, to be disruptive.
Marty, when you guys were in your heyday, right? I mean, when did you realize that the sack exchange was such a big deal for Jet fans? Was there a moment where you realized, oh my God, like this is way bigger than just being, some really good football players? It was a, cultural phenomenon, if you will, in New York during that time.
Well, I think there was two. The first event we did out in Port Jeff. We did a signing and Joe picked me up and we went out, had a couple beers on the way out there. And when we got there, there was a line going around the parking lot. And I looked at Joe and I said, good Lord, Joe, is that for us? And he said, no, that's not for us. There must be a new movie plan. But sure enough, it was for us. And then I think the second moment was going down to the New York Stock Exchange and seeing all the people waiting for us to pull up. And then once we went inside the building, all the traders down there on the floor trading stopped. And it was a special moment. But even more special now is Jake to be invited back. Because you're talking about some 40 years after the fact that, people still want to see the four of us still signing autographs. And it's a pleasure to meet the Jet fans. And it's always a pleasure to have Abdul coming back. And Abdul, his health isn't that good. But to be around the guys, it's always something special.
Marty, Joe Klecko asked you to be his Hall of Fame presenter next month. I mean, can you take us through your emotions when Joe made that call to you and he said, hey, I want you to be the guy up there with me?
Well, it was kind of ironic. We were doing the Michael K show and Don LaGreca, a good friend of mine, asked him, he said, hey, Joe, have you thought who's going to be the presenter? And Joe at that point hadn't asked me. He said, well, it might be the guy sitting alongside of you. Well, the next thing you know, all the beat writers are saying, hey, Joe asked you. And I said, well, I don't know if I heard it that way. So I called Joe a couple of days later and I said, Joe, I don't want to be Ford. I said, I'd love to. I'd be honored. And he said, yeah. He goes, I meant to call you. And I said, well, you got two sons, one, Danny, who has 3 Super Bowl rings. You got Mike, who grew up in the locker room. I said, Joe, I am truly honored. Then I went home and I told my wife, and she said, stop crying. You don't need to cry. I said, you know what? It's an emotional part of the game is when the game ends, you find out what your teammates really thought of you. Because if they thought a lot of you, you stay in contact with them. Joe and I have always stayed in contact. And, I think it shows what he thought of me as a teammate, as a player, and more so now 40 years later as a friend.
You brought up the emotions there, Marty. So I want to play you a clip. I mentioned to you off air. I had Bob Lashusen, your radio partner, Jets play-by-play announcer, on this show last month. And I asked Bob, hey, do you think Marty's going to get emotional up there giving the speech? And this was Bob Lashusen talking about that.
Duck Joe, it could not be more appropriate. The only concern, and this is a real concern, is if Marty can get through the speech. Because he will bawl at some point talking about Marty cries at the drop of a hat. He's like the biggest softy you've ever met in your life. So he'll start crying at some point when he's talking about Joe. We'll see how long it takes him to get through the speech, but he'll be great. I mean, no one could be a better Hall of Fame inductor than Marty, because no one speaks more from the heart than he does, and no one's, just more honest about his feelings about a person than Marty is. So that'll be great.
So, Marty, are you going to get choked up? Are you going to get emotional, as Bob Wischusen thinks you will?
Well, you know what, Jake? I did when I did the SNY, but, this year, I think it's maybe second or third year, the Hall of Fame, what they did was they sent somebody out here to meet me with a camera crew, and it was basically just a Q&A. It's not really doing a speech. So
Really?
They would ask, they asked me about 45 minutes worth of questions, and then they're going to take the answers and somehow maybe put a B-roll over some of the answers, because what was happening is you'd have a presenter go up there, and rather than taking 3 minutes, they take 10 minutes. Then you had an honoree that would take, rather than 10 minutes, taking 20 minutes, and it just blows up the TV schedule. So, I had a speech ready, but I didn't get asked to do the speech. It was just a Q&A, and I told Joe, you know what, it's still special, a special moment for both of us, I hope.
If you are planning on going to Las Vegas for the Jets and the Raiders on November 12th on Sunday Night Football, you need to stay at Circa Resort and Casino. Use my promo code JAKE15 to get a discount, and that discount also includes a 2-hour open bar party that I'm going to be throwing at Circa Saturday before the games. Can't wait to meet so many of you in person. It's going to be an incredible weekend. That promo code is live for those who want to go.